In the throes of a high fever, I found myself locked in a storage shed by my husband, facing a dire situation. However, when my husband opened the door 3 days later, he was shocked by the scene before him. I'm contemplating divorce. Currently, I'm living separately from my husband to sort out my feelings, but I've been reflecting on how we got to this point. Before we were married, my husband, despite his high education and income, was humble and kind. For me, coming from a poor, single-mother household with only a high school education, marrying such a man felt like a great honor. But the moment I quit my job to become a full-time homemaker, as per my husband's wish to start a family soon, he transformed into a completely different person, as if possessed. He started to berate me, saying things like being a housewife must be nice, having it easy. I hate parasites, so since I'm providing for you, you better serve me well. Moreover, while he wasn't fussy about cleaning or laundry, he was incredibly tedious about meal planning and financial management. He's not allergic, but has a strong aversion to food, disliking fish and vegetables while favoring high-calorie foods like meat and fried items. He demanded no vegetables in hamburgers or curry, causing me endless headaches. He also insisted on no vegetables in stews, eating only ramen and fried rice if they contained only meat. The only vegetables he'd tolerate were French fries and vegetable juice. Convinced that vegetable juice could make up for his nutritional deficits, I secretly tried to incorporate vegetables into dishes. But each time, he'd suspect something, asking, "Doesn't this taste weird?" When I confessed to adding vegetables, he'd turn red with anger, lecturing me for an hour about poisoning him as a dependent housewife. I could have tolerated all this, but he started financially monitoring me too. I had to show him every receipt, and if he deemed something unnecessary, he'd demand I return the money, saying, "Don't waste my money. Give it back." Any resistance from me would result in him throwing objects or breaking dishes, gradually making him a figure of terror. While I understand if I were truly wasteful, his complaints were often about my expenses for beauty, clothes, or makeup. Even with groceries, if I bought vegetables that my husband wouldn't eat, he'd immediately demand, "Give the money back." Yet, he wore expensive clothes and watches to maintain his social image, while I stopped going to the salon and wearing makeup to save money. Abandoning vegetables, once my favorite, to avoid his sarcasm, I resorted to drinking vegetable juice with him, leading to a face full of acne. The daily taunts from my husband caused headaches and stomach pains. And in this state, he demanded we start a family, leaving me no choice but to comply with his demands. Having moved to an unfamiliar area upon marriage, I lacked friends to confide in. And since my mother was thrilled about my marriage, I found it hard to talk to her. Yet, there was one person concerned for me, Katie. Katie, the mother of a large family across the street, always dressed casually, managing 4 young boys despite being in her mid-20s. Katie is a young mom in her mid-20s, always sporting blonde hair and dressed in sweats, raising a large family of 4 kids. Her husband appears young and intimidating, and given all their children are boys, they're all quite the handful. Their noisy presence and Katie's scolding voice were often heard all the way to our place. In our area, having children young tends to be frowned upon, so most neighbors steered clear of Katie's family. But for me, maybe due to the restlessness at home, hearing the joyful noise from Katie's family started to bring me some comfort. Then one day, I happened to run into Katie while taking out the trash. She suddenly apologized, saying, "I'm really sorry for the noise from my kids all the time." In that moment, I started to think she might be nicer than everyone believes. Sure, Katie looks a bit like an intimidating delinquent, but speaking to her revealed a polite and dedicated mother. Since that garbage day, Katie and I always end up chatting whenever we see each other. She has a great sense of humor, and chatting with her has brought laughter back into my life, slowly healing my lonely heart. Thanks to her, I started to ignore my husband's taunts and spending time with him became less painful. However, my newfound ease seemed to bore my husband, who began to tighten his control. No going out without my permission. Use online grocery shopping. Ask for my permission before using your smartphone. If you have time to chat with the neighbor, you better have cleaned the house from top to bottom. If you're going to gossip, then I'll take over the trash duties, he would say, interfering with my interactions with Katie. By taking over the trash duties and limiting my phone use, he aimed to cut off my contact with Katie. Moreover, he had never complained about my cooking before, but now he started, "The taste is too bland, remake it. I want something sweeter today, do it over," and so on. Any attempt at defense would result in dishes being thrown to the floor or food being dumped straight into the trash. I thought I had become stronger thanks to Katie, but under my husband's domineering attitude, I reverted back to being just a silent doll. Being confined at home with only my husband eroded my mental health, and I found it hard to even swallow my food. Then, one day, my husband forgot some important documents at home and needed them for work, so I had to deliver them to his office. Stepping outside for the first time in ages didn't lift my spirits at all. Haunted by nightly verbal abuses from my husband, I felt worthless, seeing every glance and laughter directed at me as mocking. As I returned home, relieved but still shaken, I heard Katie's warm voice from behind, "Hey, is that you?" Ashamed, I didn't respond and hurried inside. Feeling terrible for ignoring her kind attempt, I was then startled by a knock at the door. Opening it cautiously, I found no one, just a cute keychain and a note from Katie saying, "If you ever need help, press this keychain button." I knew this keychain. Katie had proudly explained it was for her children to prevent them from getting lost, equipped with a button that alerts her and includes GPS. Despite my dire situation, I lacked the courage to press that button, enduring my husband's irrational behavior. Time passed, and I fell ill at the change of the seasons. Malnourished and with weakened immunity, I was bedridden with a fever, unable to do anything. In such a state, I couldn't even care for myself, let alone do the housework, so I called my husband. "I've worsened my cold and can't move. Sorry, but could you bring home dinner or get some takeout today?" To which my husband coldly replied, "For a stay-at-home wife, can't you even manage your own health? It's all your fault, yet you're asking for my help. Make sure the house is in order as usual by the time I get back, or else." Too weak to object, I managed a feeble apology. Despite my high fever, I pushed myself to clean and cook, only to faint from the exertion. I came to when my husband splashed a bucket of water on me, berating me for resting while he worked hard. Still not fully conscious, I was frozen, unsure of what was happening, when my furious husband yelled, "I'm out there sweating and working, and you're here sleeping? What a life you have! You're trash," as he threw the bucket he was holding at me while continuing to hurl insults. Frozen from fear or fever, I couldn't respond, shaking uncontrollably. His anger escalated, lecturing me for about an hour on my perceived neglect. "The laundry's been left outside. Dinner's just burgers and soup? That's lazy. You're supposed to manage the household, and yet you're skiving off like a parasite. I'm utterly disappointed." And after saying what he wanted to say, my husband declared, "If you can't even do household chores, there's no need for you to stay in the house. I don't want to catch a cold, and until you get better and reflect properly, you're just in the way, so stay in the garden shed," and he half forced me into the backyard shed, locking it from the outside. The shed I was locked in was barely big enough to lie down in once you removed the already stored items, without any towels or blankets, so a good night's sleep was impossible. Regarding the bathroom issue, my husband said, "You're not even human, so this should be fine," and threw a pet pee pad through the small window of the shed. As for meals, he just tossed convenience store meals through the window, so I believe he was not trying to end my life, but completely dominate me. Knowing this, but lacking the will to resist, I wrapped my wet body in a plastic sheet found in the shed and endured the cold, making it through the night. Honestly, I felt my life was in danger if things continued this way. After watching my husband leave for work at his usual time, I gathered all my remaining strength and pressed the emergency button on the keychain from Katie, which I always kept on me, then lost consciousness. When I woke up next, I found myself in bed at Katie's house. Confused and disoriented, Katie noticed I was awake and came rushing over, saying, "You're awake, thank goodness." It seems Katie had received the SOS signal from me and, relying on the GPS on the keychain, had come to my house once. She said that the GPS pointed not to inside the house but to the garden shed, where she peeked in and found me collapsed inside. The key to the shed was hanging next to the door, so she didn't hesitate to unlock it and rescued me, bringing me to her place. Afterward, she fed me homemade porridge, saying, "You need to eat something." It was just ordinary porridge, but Katie's porridge tasted better than anything in the world. After regaining some strength, for the first time, I told someone about what my husband had done to me. However, I was worried that no one would believe me since my husband has a good public facade. But Katie believed every word I said. Even when I cried or struggled to explain, she patiently waited, assuring me it was okay, which made me very happy. After I had finished telling her everything, Katie asked, "Normally, I'd say you should divorce your husband, but what do you want to do, Nina?" At that moment, I was a whirlwind of emotions, unsure if I could survive after divorce or if my mother would be disappointed, so I couldn't immediately decide. Katie then said, "If you're scared of divorcing, I have a plan to see if your husband will change his ways. Are you in?" Her plan was for me to pretend to be unconscious when my husband opened the shed. If my husband noticed me unconscious and reflected on his actions, it might be a sign to change his attitude toward me. Otherwise, I could be more determined to divorce if he continued his cold behavior. With Katie's full support, I pretended to be locked in the shed. In short, I stayed at Katie's house until my husband was at work and only returned to the shed when he was home. Katie provided unused blankets and warmers, so I managed to sleep in the shed without any problems. In fact, it felt more comfortable than when I was at home since I didn't have to do any housework or shopping. I also avoided eating the meals my husband bought and ignored his questions like, "Have you reflected?" by pretending to be asleep. After 3 days of this, perhaps worried for my life, my husband finally opened the shed door. I hid the warmer and pretended to be unconscious. My husband was visibly shaken when he entered the shed and saw me lying there, especially since I had dirted my clothes with red paint from Katie's child, which looked like bloodstains in the dim light. Amusingly disturbed, he didn't even check if I was breathing before calling an ambulance, and I was taken to the hospital without resistance. Later, after undergoing thorough examinations and finding no serious issues, I was set to be discharged the next day. Learning this, my husband came to me with gentle words, "Nina, I'm really sorry. I'll change my behavior from now on," leaving me confused about whether to continue our marriage. Katie's stance was clear: if he was really concerned about you, he wouldn't have locked you away for 3 days. She believed divorce was the best option. However, I wasn't in the right mental state, so I decided to take some time before making a final decision. 3 months later, I had been contemplating divorce but finally managed to end my marriage. Afterwards, I had a discussion about our future with my husband. Katie was quite worried about me talking with my husband alone, but I wanted to handle things myself from here on. Initially, my husband was considerate and kind, something I had always wished for. But his sudden change only made me more suspicious. So, following Katie's advice, I told him I wanted to separate with divorce in mind. Hearing this, he instantly turned hostile, yelling, "What? You still don't understand your place? You're not in a position to demand a divorce. Just because I was a bit nice, you dare to get ahead of yourself. You're the one who'll suffer if we divorce," and he threw a mug at me. Unfortunately, the mug hit the back of my head, and as I fell, he shouted, "This isn't my fault. Reflect on this before panicking and fleeing the house." Thanks to him, I woke up to the reality and strengthened my resolve to divorce. And, foreseeing such an event, I had recorded our conversation, which I took to the police to file a report. Upon arrival at the station, the officers were shocked to see my face, swollen and bruised from the mug. Before filing the report, an officer accompanied me to the hospital, where I received a medical certificate. Fortunately, the injury seemed less severe than it looked. After filing the report, I bravely went to my mother's house, where she cried upon seeing me, breaking my heart. Then, borrowing money from relatives, I hired a lawyer and started the divorce proceedings. My husband, fearing damage to his career, agreed to the divorce, repeatedly questioning, "Are you sure about this? You'll be the one struggling." Ignoring his remarks, I quickly filed for divorce. Following the divorce, under the agreement of property division and compensation, I withdrew the complaint. During my conversations with Katie, it turned out she was the niece of the president of the company where my ex-husband worked. After the divorce, I asked her to report his deeds to the president. The president, known to be a family man, was furious upon learning the truth, especially since my ex-husband had lied about the divorce reasons to his company, leading to his demotion to a regional office. Moreover, his misdeeds were well known at his new location, making him a pariah, resembling a zombie at work. Inspired by being called worthless by my ex, I obtained a certification and am now working under much better conditions than before. When I visited Katie after a while to thank her, she said, "I was worried, but you did well settling things on your own," which brought tears to my eyes. I've decided to live truthfully to myself from now on.